again, we're blessed in Idaho that we are a conservative state, and law enforcement is still valued here. In contradiction to other states around us, law enforcement is still valued and still supported in Idaho. I don't get a lot of opposition to law enforcement issues. I hope that doesn't change. We don't have discussions about defunding police and things like that. The support is definitely behind our law enforcement and rule of law. Chris Allgood, retired law enforcement, 30 years.
And where did you work?
Caldwell PD for the entire 30 years. I started with the city when I was 22 years old and was much older when I left.
Can you give the audience, the listeners, a little bit of background about where you grew up? What was your experience? How did you get into law enforcement?
Yeah, law enforcement is kind of one of those things that you don't expect it, but it becomes addicting. I grew up in Canyon County, Caldwell. I'll farm work, farm kid all my life. My parents were wonderful people, but we lived in poverty most of my childhood. So I left home. I quit school and left home in the 10th grade. I was 16. Did everything you can think of as far as jobs. I got my GED and did all kinds of things. And being poor sucks. And so from a very early age, I had it in my head that I was going to get rich. And that was, even as a teenager, I read get rich books. I started businesses. I just really, that was my life, because again, being poor really sucks. So I was doing exactly that. I wasn't making any money, but I was working towards those goals. Again, most of my experience up to becoming a law enforcement officer was agriculture. I worked on ranches. I spent 2 years in Wyoming as a horse wrangler on dude ranches. I did a winter in Wyoming on a dynamite crew. Just whoever would hire me. Anyway, I had a best friend that we'd been best friends since 8th grade. He was a couple years older than me, and he became a police officer. And a crazy deal is he got hired right into a narcotics unit. He went to post as a narc, and so he started 21 years old as a narc, and he did that for many years. And but he got me interested in law enforcement. Said, you need to try. So in 1985, I tested for the Caldwell Police Department. And again, I know nothing. I've got a GED. I'm thinking I'm not going to have a chance in heck of getting a job, And so I tested, didn't hear anything. So me and a friend went to Arizona, and we're painting houses in Arizona for work. And I get a call, you need to come back up and interview. So I haul butt back to Caldwell and do an interview. And when I tested, I was testing against people with college degrees and stuff like that. I just really felt like I was out of place. And they hired me. 22 years old. And I was very shy. I didn't talk to people much. And so I started with them in October of 85, went to academy in like January, February of 86. And I was on patrol, and it was wild. I mean, Caldwell back in those days was a rough and wild place. And so it was like going from being working on a farm or a ranch to in the mix of everything, and so it was quite the experience. But And when I got hired at Caldwell and became a police officer, I told myself, I'm going to do this for about 2 years. I'm going to build a nest egg, then I'm going to go back to getting rich. That was my thing. I was getting rich was just my goal in life. So anyway, but like I said, being in police work, once you get there and you do it for a while, it's just hard to do anything else. And so I just never left.
Chris, can you explain to the viewers and listeners, where is Caldwell?
Caldwell is southwest Idaho. Probably, it's much closer to Boise than it used to be because both cities have grown. Probably 20, 22 miles west of Boise on I-84. Like I said, from the time I started, it was probably 22,000 people. When I started, it's over 70,000 today.
Okay.
You know, everything's grown together.
And when you said you went to post for training, what kind of training in 85 was given to you?
That was another interesting thing. It's much different. In 85, there was not a post academy like we have today, a big facility over in Meridian. We lived, Post Academy was a suite of office buildings over off of Curtis that had been converted into cubicle rooms and training rooms. It was just it was a former business park of some kind that they had turned into Post Academy. And so at that time, Post Academy was 7 weeks long. It was a good academy. They did a good job, but it was not near as technical or as involved as the academies are today. But it was good. I mean, I felt like it was a quality training.
Okay. And when you started patrol in 85, can you talk a little bit about what kind of cases or what kind of calls you would answer back in 85?
Oh, yeah. So again, things were less evolved than they are today. So when I started, you go right into the field training program, which was, again, pretty rudimentary. You just got in and rode with an officer. There was no daily observation reports, DORs, and any of that. That you just rode with an officer for a while. It was not formal, and so I rode with an officer. I think the program was 7 weeks at that point, and then they kick you out, and there you go. So it was real basic. You know, back then, you know, it seems like forever ago, we didn't have computerized records at all. If you wanted to look up a bad guy, you went to a 3x5 card file, and you went by name. You went alphabetically to find the bad guy, and that bad guy's record would be typed across this 3x5 card. And we typed our reports on a typewriter. And when you took your report to the sergeant, if he had issues with it, he red marked it, and you typed the whole thing all over again. So it was, 85 seems pretty, like we were pretty well along in life, but back then, but for police work in Caldwell, it was still, again, Caldwell was a rough, low budget place back then, and so it was still antiquated. When you started work at Caldwell, you had to buy your own gun. They furnished you a gun long enough for you to make enough money, and then you had to buy your own gun. And you could carry pretty much. There wasn't a lot of limits on what you carried. I carried a Smith & Wesson 686 most of my patrol career. I love that gun. That was a great gun. But anyway, but that's the way Caldwell was back then. Kind of a quick story, but I've never forgotten it. I got a call again, hadn't been on working that long, got a call of an unattended death. And so I'm going to this call, and the dispatcher says, go to channel 4. Channel 4 is basically a car to car. It's not repeated, so a little more private. And the dispatcher says, have you ever done one of these before? I've never done. I don't know what to do. So he kind of walks me through it on Channel 4, tells me what I need to be doing. The dispatcher's just kind of, he's been a dispatcher for a while. He knows what he's doing. Anyway, so I get there, and sure enough, there's a dead guy in the chair. He just died of old age, and his family's all around him. And again, I'm 22 years old, 23 years old. I don't have a clue. So I stand there and visit with his son, a guy named Dewey Henshaw. And I visit with him, and it took the coroner forever to get there. It was like well over an hour. And over that period of time, Dewey was a little bitty guy. He was a former jockey. He was old at the time I met with him. But anyway, Dewey and I remained friends for years and years and years till he passed away. But that was one of the cool things about local law enforcement is you built relationships with people whether you wanted to or not, good guys, bad guys, because you see that there's 22,000 people. You see the same people all the time. So anyway, but Caldwell back then was again a rough place, a lot of violence, a lot of gangs, a lot of drugs. Shootings, drive-by shootings. It was quite a place to grow up in. If you like doing police work, it was quite a place to grow up in police work.
So I'm curious. Even back in '85, you had a gang problem there.
Oh, big.
What kind of gangs were there?
Most of them were local people. They were almost 100% Hispanic gangs. East Side, West Side. The warlord back in those days, the warlords were big, and it was almost 100% gang on gang violence. But we had so much shootings and stabbings that. And I shouldn't say that, but it was just not a safe place to be. I mean, as a normal person, you typically wouldn't get involved unless you got caught in the crossfire or something. But we had a lot of gang issues in the schools, and so our pretty much our focus, was just violence suppression. But and that lasted for probably the first 15 to 20 years of my career. Caldwell we made national news. USA Today, we made national news for the amount of violence in Caldwell.
So Chris, I'm really curious about that because in '85, I think of Boise and the surrounding areas, a lot of agriculture, a lot of farms going on.
Mm-hmm.
Where did the gang element come from? What brought it to Caldwell?
Well, that was the thing was, we were a big agricultural county, a lot of migrant workers, tons of them. I mean, in the spring, your population would just increase and you would see all these people you didn't see before. These migrant workers would come through doing their work. And for the most part, these were good, hardworking people that caused very little trouble. But many stayed and had kids here, and that second generation were different. They were not the hardworking, law-abiding citizens. They early on migrated to gang life and then developed generations of gang life. We'd have 2 and 3 generations of gang member, and it was, like I said, it was by vast majority of the Hispanic gangs. It was just kind of the makeup of it back then. And again, the drugs that came in were controlled by Hispanic drug organizations, and so that was kind of the I don't know, that was the way it was back then. It was pretty crazy.
So from '85 to '91, you start off on patrol, and your goal is to establish a nest egg. You think maybe I'm going to be here for about 2 years. Obviously, you stay longer than that. So
Yeah.
you make it past the 2 years. What drove you to stay? What was the impetus to go, well, I'm going to stay past those 2 years?
it was a whole bunch of things, but once I got involved in police work, and I was kind of addicted to the action environment. I think I started in '85. I think Caldwell started their SWAT team in '87. I was one of the first members on the SWAT team, and we it was just I love that involvement. I love the you put on a uniform, you get a level of respect that was new to me, because again, I'd never seen that before, and then also start getting a check every month, like a somewhat decent check, which had been a first experience for me. And so I just found myself, police work is the hardest thing I've ever done, but I also found myself just really being involved in it, and in those days it was so involving that I and others would go in on our days off and ride just to stay involved. If you worked night shift, you were used to being up all night. My wife would, sleep at night. I would go out and ride with other officers on my days off. It was just addicting. It was the environment was just something that I took to. Yeah.
Was there anything that surprised you, or that you look back on now, being 22 years old? How was that learning experience for you? Was there anything that kind of happened to you at 22, or for the first couple years, that you were like, oh man, I wish I would have known that, that I know now?
Oh yeah. Well, yes. Again, when I started, I was a really shy, reserved guy, and so I struggled when you're in a police car and you're in uniform and you're driving around or you're doing something. Everybody is looking at you all the time. You pull up to a stop sign, nobody will move. You got to go first. You know what I mean? It's like, and being the center of the attention, the focus of whatever's going on was hard for me. You know what I mean? I struggled with that. But and I look back now, it really was an evolution for me in social skills and things. And the kind of one of the great things that came out of police work for me is I built so many really good relationships. I have a friend. Matter of fact, I talked to him just a couple days ago. He was a real OG. He was a gang member from way back. He was involved in a murder. He did 15 years in prison. 15-year sentence. He didn't do the whole 15 years, but he was always just a decent guy to talk to, and so he got out of prison. He got out of prison. He was banned from Idaho for the rest of his sentence, and so he was in California. He had an issue with a baby mama up here and his kid, so he calls me up and says, "Hey, Chief, can you help me?" Again, him and I had known each other since the olden days. Can you help me with this? I helped him with a case. It was successful, and like I said, I just talked to him last week, or this week. What is today, Friday? Yeah, I talked to him this week. He still reaches out and visits once in a while. And so those relationships that I built over all those years are just really important to me. They really kind of supported my desire, my appreciation of law enforcement. I mean, law enforcement to me, to this day, I mean, I just love cops. I mean, cops just are, they're just the best.
So looking at your career progression, 85 to 91, and there's a lot of patrol back to investigations, but in 91, would it fair to say that you got promoted and went to investigations?
Somewhat, yes. It's change of assignment, but
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're a detective in investigations. What happens? What do you start working on?
So back in those days, when you went to investigations, they moved you to what they called checks and frauds, which was the minor league of investigations. And I was given a big folder full of bad checks, and back then we actually prosecuted bad checks, insufficient funds, closed account checks, and stuff like that. And so I spent most of my time chasing down bad check writers, but you were on call. So, and it didn't, when you were on call, it didn't matter what came in, you got that. So, called out a lot for different kinds of crimes and stuff. But my day-to-day work was, for a short period of time, checks and frauds, and then before long, I was doing persons crimes and anything that is crimes against children, that kind of thing. It just kind of all, in a small department, you catch everything.
So persons crimes, can you kind of give an example of kind of the crimes that you were investigating?
Rape, robbery, murder, aggravated battery.
Okay, so you guys didn't have like a dedicated homicide unit then?
Oh, no. It was, glad you said that. When we had a homicide back in those days, it was like a department-wide thing. They called people, I mean, later in my career, when I was chief, a homicide, we just dealt with that. We had done it enough. We were good at it, and we had dealt with that. But back in those days, it was like all in. Everybody's working it, because there was only like 2 or 3 detectives, and you needed more people. But yeah, so everything. I was involved in the first homicide case that was actually my case was a gang murder in 1994. That was my first homicide where I was a case officer, and it was a gang murder, and then it went from there.
So I should have asked this in the beginning, but can you give me an idea? In 1985, when you started with Caldwell PD, how many officers did you have? And then when you retired later on in 2015, how big did the department get, and how many officers did you have then?
When I started, I want to say we had 20 to 22 officers right in that area. When I left, we had 81 employees. Probably 65 to 70 of those were officers.
Okay, so expanded triple.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
During that time, from 85 to when you retired as chief in 2015, did you see a change in the type of crimes that were being committed, or was it just the same, just more?
No, there was a big change caused by us. So most of my career, Caldwell was known for gangs and crime, violence, and so we had done that. We were reporting over 100 drive-bys a year, and it just got wild, and kind of the thing that pushed it over the edge was in 2000. I think it was 2005 or 6. We had a gang murder where a drive-by, and they shot a gang member dead in his front yard at noon. I mean, in the middle of town. And so the council called the chief and I in. I was captain at that point, and said, again, we had made national news, and like, we got to do something here. What are we going to do? And that was the start of our street crimes or gang unit. And it took a while to get it off the ground, but that was the start of our gang unit, where we, you can kind of call it one of the others, a gang unit or a repeat offender unit, because their focus was repeat offenders, but most of those people were gang members. And that was the start, and focused heavily just on strict enforcement. And as it evolved, we partnered with the prosecutor's office, we partnered with probation and parole, the sheriff's office, and we just built this collaboration, and it was a zero tolerance enforcement type of thing. If you were a repeat offender and you jaywalked, you were going to see us. I mean, it was that, and then the FBI came to town with a violent crimes task force, and all the local departments sent investigators to work in this violent crimes task force, which was housed in Caldwell. And so street crimes would identify gang members, gang problems. Violent crimes task force would work those into federal cases, which made a huge difference. And so over a period of time, again with this cooperative effort, we took the gang problem from the most intense thing down to very little today. Caldwell is not the same place it was 15 years ago, and I was just down at our plaza Tuesday night with my wife listening to music. Well, that plaza where we were sitting listening to music used to be dive bars, adult bookstores, and you wouldn't go down there after dark. And so gangs in Caldwell are minimal these days, probably less than Nampa or Boise now.
So who came up with the idea to start the gang unit, the street teams?
Bob Soba was the instigator. That he was our chief for a very long time, and he's the one that kicked that off. And
do you know where he came up with the idea?
I don't. But it was the kickoff of some of a change.
Okay, and so just talking about your kind of career progression. I mean, 85 you get hired, and then you just keep getting promoted. You go from corporal to sergeant to lieutenant to captain, and you keep. And you correct me if I'm wrong, but it looks like you go from patrol to investigations. Was there any other units beside investigations that you were in?
Well, I was SWAT for many years. I was a field training officer. I was a EVOC instructor, firearms instructor. I did lots of different things. But no, it was either probably the biggest part of my time when I was a detective sergeant. I spent a number of years doing crimes against children. I worked with health and welfare a lot. That was a big one for me. That was something I really, I don't know. It was one of those things that I just felt strongly about. Spent a lot of time working in that area.
That seems to me it would be a tough area to work. How was that? That
was a very tough area to work. It really made me angry with some parents. These people, they get involved in alcohol and drugs and things, and their kids become less and less important. And I saw some very tragic situations where, I took kids out of the home on many occasions. Again, because the parents were just, I shouldn't say parents, usually it was a mother, but.
So in 2012, you get promoted to captain.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not quite sure, the sheriff's office and the PDs,
yes.
They're all different, right? So is a captain's position more of like an assistant chief for Caldwell?
It is, yes.
Okay, so
it was at that time.
Okay,
yes.
so basically there's no assistant chief at that time.
Right. If the chief's gone, I was the chief.
As a captain, are you basically administration at that point, or are you still kind of overseeing cases like the child cases, right, stuff like that?
No. It is 100% administration.
Okay.
In those days, the captain did all the internal affairs stuff. It was a lot of administrative stuff, a lot of supervisory stuff. The chief was doing citywide political, council, budget, that kind of thing. Captain was more of the day-to-day operations. I had lieutenants under me that did patrol and investigations. So mine was day-to-day operations as captain.
So I'm curious, you have this desire or this kind of calling. You're working on these child cases, right? How was that? How was that transition for you to be working on these cases and all of a sudden it's just admin? That's it.
Right, and it was hard because again, I've always been someone that built relationships, and so people would call me. People still call me today with issues. Will you help me with this? Will you help me? And again, you're in that different spot. You're a captain, and even the lieutenants didn't do as many cases as the officers that worked for them, and so it was different. I was happy with it. I enjoyed the job. Again, I am super loyal to Caldwell Police Department. I'm super loyal to officers, and so it was always trying to make things better. And it kind of funny, you talked about me moving up through the ranks. Moving up through the ranks was never my desire. It was always that I was aggravated with how somebody was doing it above me, and it's like, man, if I was in that position, I'd be doing this and this and this, and so I would get promoted just so I could do what I thought needed to be done rather than the guy that was doing it, and that I was never, except when I got to captain. When I got to captain, I decided that I think I want to be chief. I think I want to go for chief. But again, I had a GED, and the chief of police, Bob Soba, he had 2 degrees and master's degree, and the rule was you had to have a college degree to be chief. So I went back to college. I went to college. I started college at 35. I got my bachelor's degree at 42. And so I have a degree in leadership and management, and it worked for me. I in 2007 at 45 I was Bob Soba retired, and I was appointed to chief. So, but that was the only time I really wanted to get promoted.
And so how did that work in terms of, I'm assuming, typically they will advertise a spot like that for chief of police. Sometimes they won't.
Mm-hmm.
How did it work for you?
It was the same way. It was competitive. But the mayor at that time, Garrett Nancolis, he was a very involved mayor, a wonderful mayor. And I had worked for him for so long that we had a good relationship. And I had a good relationship with the council, and so when it came to testing, I had a leg up because I had a good record, and Bob Soba had done a good job before me, and so there wasn't any drama that needed to be cleaned up or anything. Things were going well, and so so I was successful in that competition.
Was there just one captain?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, there was one captain at that time.
Okay, and so you said up until that time, you saw your desire was to get into the next position to make a change.
Yeah.
But you really didn't look to keep moving up. But at some point you go, you know what, I want to be chief. What was the thought process? Why did you want to be chief? Being the captain, I was very involved in management of the department, and I in a department that size, everybody, you're friends with everybody, and I just felt like I knew Bob Soba, was going to retire at some point. Bob had been chief for many years. He left Caldwell and became the director of law enforcement for the state of Idaho. And so he was there, and then he retired from that job, and then came back. When a chief's position opened up in Caldwell again, he came back and was rehired as chief again. And so I knew he was going to retire not too long, because he'd already retired once, And so it was just,
I wanted to be the next guy, you know.
But did you want to be the next guy because you're like, hey, I think I can do this better, or I have some ideas where I think I can make this department better?
Both.
Okay.
Yeah, both. Yeah, yeah. Um, uh, Bob Soba, is a great guy, but he's hard to work for. Boy, there's one way of doing things, and that's Bob's way. And you know, he would let you know if it wasn't right. And so it's kind of interesting that in those days, him and I worked closely together, but it was 100% professional relationship. There was we just we worked hard, but we weren't buddies or anything. You know what I mean? Now that he's retired, I'm retired. We're buddies. We go to tea. You know, we have fun. You know, and I wanted to just kind of enhance a lot of the things he did. I wanted to make the working environment a little more comfortable, and he had done a lot of good things that I just wanted to you know, continue. But anyway, and being the chief, I mean, I love police work start to finish, but being the chief was the best thing I've ever done. It was amazing.
Any surprises?
Not that I can think of offhand. Again, I was so blessed because the mayor and council that I worked for were so supportive. Good times, bad times. You know, the timing was bad for me. I got promoted in 2007. You know, and Caldwell never had a lot of money. But in 2007, I got promoted. In 2008, we had the crash. And from 2008 to like 2011 or 12, we had the value of the city of Caldwell dropped by a third. And we had hardly any tax revenue. So we were broke. I mean, it was so, it was a tough time. We didn't get pay raises for 5 years. And
so you weren't getting rich being a
no, getting rich was kind of off the table at that point. I kept telling myself, wait for Percy, you know. But no, it was good, you know. One of the things I'd like to touch on just briefly is law enforcement is wonderful. It was a wonderful thing for me, but the mental toll and the physical toll that it takes on you is significant. And over the period of time that I was in law enforcement, especially in administration, I saw good officers that they were really good officers, and they just come apart, and they would do stupid things. They would get terminated or just quit. And I always thought to myself, man, that's stupid. He's such a good guy. Why'd he do that stupid thing? You know, why would he act like that? But it takes an emotional toll on people, and over time, they don't really want to quit, but their body makes them quit, and their mind, you know, they do stupid things. No, you know, the result is they separate from law enforcement, but it's what they need because it just takes such a terrible toll on you. And by the time I was done, I was done. I mean, I was.
So as chief, did you implement any programs, or was there anything in place to help officers that were struggling, or that were kind of, you know, getting to a bad place where like, oh man, I'm gonna quit? Or
not near enough. Now that I'm out, I see so many things I would like to have done more, and I still want to do more. It is a situation where when I was chief, I attended training on early intervention, recognizing officers that were starting to make that descent, and we did implement situations where officers could go talk to a psychologist or a counselor and kind of get things figured out, and we also started the critical intervention situation where you have an ugly situation, you get in a room, you talk about it, you have a mediator. Those things we brought in, but there's still so much more to be done in that area.
So I always like to ask a couple questions of people that've been in law enforcement for a long time. So how much time did you have in law enforcement?
30 years.
30 years. So in those 30 years, did being a law enforcement officer affect your family at all?
It did. It did. You know, I'm on my second marriage. I was married to my first wife for 20 years. But being in, for me, it was so all encompassing. I worked holidays, I worked weekends, I missed lots of important stuff, and I spent a lot of time on night shift when I was on patrol. And when you're on night shift, I'll speak for me, you kind of, when you're on day, let me tell you, on day shift, you meet a lot of good people, a lot of regular everyday people, but traffic sucks and you're doing crappy calls like stolen bikes and car crashes, you know. On night shift, you're doing bar fights and car chases, and so night shift is much better. And there's no administration around, you know, in the police department. You know, you're on your own. And so I always liked night shift. I did a lot of night shift, but you kind of develop this bad attitude, this kind of you know, tough guy attitude or whatever. You kind of, and I would bring that home. You know, you just like, I don't want to hear you. I don't want to deal with you. You know, I'm in my zone kind of thing. And one thing that I learned very early on, my wife learned very early on, is when, you know, I'd be home, everything's fine. When I started getting ready for work and putting on my uniform, we had to quit talking, because I would change my focus, my demeanor, and I was not good. You know, don't tell me the dishwasher isn't working or anything. I'm in a different mode, and you know, we would get in arguments if you know, it's just time to change. And so anyway, I don't know. I don't want to make myself sound mental or anything.
Well, I guess, and you know, you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but would you say that led to the demise of your first marriage?
Well, it was a number of things, but somewhat, probably, I'm sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And
he probably even, with my second marriage, I'm still married, it almost led to the demise of that. After I got out of law enforcement, I was out of law enforcement for a while, and I could tell I was having emotional issues and things. And so over a period of time, things got real rocky. Our relationship was a mess. And I saw a counselor for quite a while. Made a huge difference. I thought everything that was going wrong was my wife's fault, and I blamed her for most of it. But it turns out it was me. And counseling made a big difference.
Good. Okay. So 30 years of law enforcement, obviously takes a toll on your family. How about this? From the time when you were 22 until the time that you retired, did you notice a change in yourself in terms of how you saw people in society?
Yes and no. I know you and I talked before about some officers just reach a point where they just don't like people at all. I didn't ever get there. I enjoy relationships. I enjoy people. I never did get that angry towards society as a whole. The thing that did change me, that has never left, is that hypervigilance. I'm kind of always up. If I'm outside the house, I'm just kind of always up. Everything is like a yellow, you know. You're never in condition white outside the house, and that has always stayed with me. I don't know if that's typical of retired law enforcement officers, but that's I've had that hypervigilance forever. You know, it just never went away.
Okay. So let's talk about, since you left, since you retired as chief, what have you been doing? What do you currently do?
So, as I was retiring, getting ready to retire in police work, one of the council members came to me and said, "Hey, I am moving outside the city. Would you be interested in running for my spot on the city council?" And I had been stressing about retiring because I was so heavily involved in the city as police chief that just cutting it off cold turkey, I was concerned about. And so I jumped at that opportunity. And so as I was retiring, I ran for city council in Caldwell and was elected. So I started my term in city council in 2016, and I'm still on city council today. So I again, being heavily involved with the city for so long, I've just stayed involved. And so I've ran for city council 3 times, been elected 3 times, and it's been a good thing. The transformation of Caldwell's been wonderful. I love that I had a part in it. And then kind of the similar situation, about a year and a half ago, a friend of mine came to me and said, I'm not going to run for my position in the legislature. How about you run for my position? And that one I had to think about. I didn't just jump at that one. And I visited with my wife, and she was a hard no, but I did it anyway. And so I ran for the legislature and was elected. And so this year, starting in January of this year, was my first term in the legislature. And I think I'm going to try to stay a while if I'll keep getting elected.
And how is that? I mean, obviously, chief is I guess a little bit of political, where you're having to deal with people. You have to get along with most people. So maybe it was an easy transition, but how have you found being in politics?
The transition from police chief to city council was an easy one because, again, I feel like I'm kind of an authority on Caldwell. If there's things going on in Caldwell, I'm pretty familiar with Caldwell. So that was an easy one. Going to the legislature, boy, that's a whole different animal. The politics are insane. The amount of feedback and public opinion that you get is overwhelming. You are constantly being barraged with people with opinions on how things should be. You try to find your own way, but the pressure is immense. It's much different than Caldwell City Council. Caldwell City Council would make big decisions, and the legislature is crazy. Do
you have any topics of interest or topics that you are trying to pursue in the House?
I am, yes. If I can do anything to support law enforcement, that is my first, by all means, goal. I ran a fentanyl bill last year. Didn't get through, but it's still in process. I'm running against this year. Law enforcement is my big focus. Again, I grew up here, and I love Idaho. We have this huge influx of people from other states because Idaho is such an awesome place. My big effort is to keep the Idaho values that we've always had. We see states around us, Oregon, Washington, California, just making what I consider to be stupid decision after stupid decision. And I don't want any of that to influence or change the values that Idaho has had in all of my life. And so I very much support conservative values, that kind of thing. I just feel like that's what makes us great.
Do you find with this day and age, there's a real negative light toward law enforcement? Do you find any opposition to you and your opinions on law enforcement within the House?
Not many. Again, we're blessed in Idaho that we are a conservative state, and law enforcement is still valued here. In contradiction to other states around us, law enforcement is still valued and still supported in Idaho. I don't get a lot of opposition to law enforcement issues. I hope that doesn't change. We don't have discussions about defunding police and things like that. That's the support is definitely behind our law enforcement and rule of law.
Okay. Chris, thank you very much. I appreciate the interview.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you.